Good day, ladies and gentlemen. My name is John Devine, and I'm joined by one of my colleagues, Angelo Calianno. We are members of ITSS Verona, and today we are joined by Barat Ali Batoor to discuss about the Hazara people of Afghanistan and his experience working there as a documentarian photographer. Firstly, could you please describe your family's experience in Afghanistan and a little bit about their history and ultimately their reasons why they left Afghanistan?
First of all, I would like to say thank you, John and Angelo, for having me in your show. Going back to the history, like why my people fled, so I would like to go a bit further behind that, like in the history. So I belong to Hazara ethnic group in Afghanistan. The Hazaras have been long persecuted. So basically, like in the late 1800s, in 1890s, the King Abdul Rahman massacred the Hazaras, 63% of the Hazara population. So, and also he occupied the lands belonged to the Hazaras. So after that, what he did was he imposed heavy taxes on what little the Hazaras were left with, and it was extremely difficult circumstances for the Hazaras to live and like to pay for their living, and also like pay heavy or huge taxes to the government. And also they were treated as third-class citizens. They were not allowed to educational institutes. They were not allowed to have proper jobs. They were not allowed to have a life like other ethnic groups in Afghanistan. So that was one of the reasons. So that continued to later in the like coming decades after that, even in the new century, in the late 20th century. So my father, he was very young, and he fled with his family to Pakistan because of that ongoing persecution and oppression. So at that time, a lot of Hazaras were fleeing for neighboring countries to get a better life and to be treated better. So they were fed up of how they were living in the difficult circumstances. So that was the history, and he got married with my mom, and then I was like my sisters, and like I was born. We were born in Pakistan. So yeah, that was a brief history about like how they came out, and after that the civil war broke there, and then the communist government came into the power, and the civil war started, and the Taliban. So, and the rest is history.
So you mentioned you were born in Pakistan. What was it like being a Hazaran person growing up in Pakistan?
I remember like one of my friends who was like older man, like he's an activist, Hazara activist. So he lived in the US and other countries, and also, but he was born in Afghanistan. So he has experienced the civil war and things. So when he came to Pakistan, his experience or his memories from Pakistan is that he was very proud and happy for the Hazaras of Pakistan, because they were the only groups of the Hazaras who were living with dignity and with pride as a Hazara. Because Hazaras in Afghanistan, even they could not call themselves Hazaras because they were ashamed. There were a lot of shaming with their identities to be called Hazaras. So it was like they used the word Hazara is a curse for the people. So but as opposed to that, in Pakistan, Hazaras were like very proud of their identity, and they were with pride they would call themselves Hazaras, and with their surnames they would use Hazara. And so growing up in Pakistan was good for me personally as well. So we didn't have any issues, any problem. We lived a very good life and had the opportunity to get the benefit of like normal life as any other locals there. So like we were not very much differentiated. So I can say that the Hazaras in Pakistan live much better life than our fellow Hazaras in Afghanistan.
Batoor, I have a question which is reconnected what you said before about persecution. So going back to the past, because somehow the persecution is still on, the attack against the Shiites placed by the Taliban in Kabul. From your view, the beginning of the persecution was about, I mean, to steal the lands of the Hazaras. It was about something to do with the ethnicity, something to do with the religion, the division between Sunnis and Shiite. How the massacre started?
I think basically it was because Hazaras, they made the largest, or at that time before like that 63% of the Hazara population were massacred. So they made the biggest or the largest population of Afghanistan at that time. So imagine like if they were not, if they had not gone through that genocide, so we would have been the largest ethnic today in Afghanistan. So, and at that time also the Hazaristan, which is central Afghanistan, was not controlled by the central government in Kabul. So they were kind of very much independent. And in order to bring them under control, the king, Abdurrahman, with the help of the British, he invaded or attacked the Hazaras and killed. So they were unsuccessful a couple of times, but eventually they gained success, like because British was behind them and they had more power and more resources to do that. Yeah, so that was the reason. It was more kind of racial hatred and motivation rather than religious, because religion was just only used as a tool to motivate people from Sunni sects of Islam to stand up and take part in that attack against the Hazaras. But like I'm saying that just to clear, because even the Hazaras who converted into the Sunni sect of Islam, or they were Sunni Hazaras, they were also attacked. Like they were not spared by these ethnic forces, like by the Pashtun forces or like government at that time. So that's why I'm saying like this is just mostly ethnical or racial motivated attacks, and that is how it started, and it is continuing. You're right that it is still going on to this day, and just probably a couple of weeks ago, a week or 2 weeks ago, there was a big rally or kind of online wave of hashtags of like protests that hashtag stop Hazara genocide. So that was on from all around the world, the Hazaras and the non-Hazaras, those who supported this like the Hazaras and like wanted to stop the genocide of the Hazaras. They took part, and this went on. So yeah, so this is still going on. Hazaras are under constant attack, and they're identified and they are being killed. It is very different from the other attacks which are happening in other parts of Afghanistan. Hazaras are one of the very soft targets and one of the most persecuted and targeted ethnics in current era or like days in Afghanistan.
You mentioned the continued persecution of the Hazaras. Was there any improvement since the US invasion of Afghanistan in 2001 and the previous 2 decades? Was there increased protection for the Hazaras? Was there a better condition of life for them in Afghanistan? Or did it make little difference in your opinion?
Since the genocide of the Hazaras in late 1800s, I guess this was the only period when the Hazaras thrived and they enjoyed more freedom and better life relatively. But that does not mean that they haven't been persecuted or oppressed or marginalized or discriminated. They have been. I will come to that point, but relatively they have enjoyed much better life. They had the rights to education. They took part in the political scenario of the country, though it was to a very large extent it was just symbolically politically engagement, and also that goes also to the incompetency of the Hazara leaders in the government, who basically probably prioritize their own self-interests rather than putting the interest of the Hazara people in forefront. So we could say in 2010 and 2009, there were a lot of we saw articles in New York Times, in other newspapers, that the Hazaras are thriving in education. This is Hazaras were the hope of Afghanistan educationally. So they kind of revolutionized in education system of Afghanistan. Most of the people who topped or who got out of the high schools and for the entry exams of the university, most of them, they were from Hazara provinces, and kind of 50% or over of them, the numbers were just from Hazara populated provinces and districts. So that made the Kabul government, which is very kind of ethnical or motivated government, controlled by either Karzai regime or the Ashraf Ghani. So it made them worried, and they later on they kind of created a quota system for each province. So it is only Hazaras who are taking place and seats at the universities, not the people from other provinces, especially from Pashtun populated areas. And they kind of there has been very systematic discrimination against the Hazaras going on, not only in the education system, but also in the offices, in every way of life. They were facing challenges, though they could not do it very openly as they used to do it, but still it was happening. And it's it got even worse under the Ashraf Ghani government.
Do you expect this continued discrimination to get worse once the US troops pull out at the end of this year?
I guess this is a very complex situation currently in Afghanistan, and almost the US forces have pulled out, majority of them from Afghanistan. Maybe there are a very small number of them are remaining, and according to the President Biden, he said they will pull out. The pullout will be completed before the deadline they had given, which will be 11th of September. So, with no surprise, the situation in Afghanistan is very complex, and this power struggle or between the regional powers and America, it is basically their fight in Afghanistan. Now Pakistan is involved, Iran is involved, China is involved, Russia is involved, America is involved. So all these countries, they have their allies and they have their proxies to supporting in Afghanistan, and most of them, they are kind of probably their interests are laying with the Taliban, and all of them, they have somehow relationships with this regime. And the future in Afghanistan seems very bleak and dark to me, and especially to the minorities in Afghanistan, the future does not seem very promising and very good. Minorities such as the Hazaras, Hazaras, I think is the most will be the most targeted and persecuted, and that is the ethnic the Hazaras will I think it will be the ethnic group who will suffer the most in Afghanistan after the pullout. And unfolding of the situation already, like it will not take very long to get very worse. Already we are seeing almost every day a couple of districts are falling under to the Taliban, and Taliban are occupying them. So which is a really concerning situation at the moment in Afghanistan.
Also, Batoor, the Italian troops, you're right, Italian troops pulled out a couple of weeks ago. So slowly, I mean, the West soldiers are actually leaving Afghanistan. Batoor, I want to ask you some questions about your work, actually. You were born in Pakistan, but then you decided to go back and work in Afghanistan. Can you tell me what was your work in Afghanistan? How old were you when you were back to Afghanistan?
The first time I went to Afghanistan I was just 18 years old. So I went there as an interpreter with Sunday Telegraph to go to Kandahar. So when we arrived in Kandahar, so Taliban was still present in Kandahar. So the night we arrived, so they were it was their final hours. They were leaving the city. And that early morning, the next early morning, Americans, they kind of captured Kandahar city. And the next day we had a meeting with the American Marines at the Kandahar Airways. So that was my first time, and it was just a three days trip. And after that, I went to Afghanistan permanently to go live and work in 2005. So I started working with the International Organization for Migration there, and at the same time I was documenting the daily lives of the Hazaras in Bamiyan. So which was another kind of a start of my further journalism career, and also like understanding the situation better in Afghanistan, and especially in Hazaristan. So that was a very good experience. And also after that I did work with the different other organizations as a freelancer, and also worked with the United Nations, and then later on with the US Embassy. And also I freelanced for different magazines and newspapers like India Today, Washington Post, Newsweek, and others.
I've seen some of your work regarding the sex slaves and these the dance to the warlords. Can you tell us more about this situation and your work regarding this?
Yes, I did that story in 2009 and 10. Basically, I completed that in 2010. So I got a grant from Open Society Institute. So I proposed this project for them, and they gave me a grant to complete this. So this practice is very kind of a dark side of Afghanistan, where like powerful people, they are involved in sexual abuse of children, young boys, as young as 7 years, 8 years boys. Like what they do is they kidnap or buy these children from their parents. So most of the time, the parents or the families, they do not have a say because they do not have the power. And these people are powerful enough to get them by force, even if they don't sell it. Sell their kids to them. So they put these kids to be as their sex slaves, and also use them as dancers, or make them dance in their parties for their entertainment, which is a very kind of dark tradition in Afghanistan's recent histories, but it is not very recent. It has been going on for like a couple of decades, probably for now. So I did document that story, and then that got published on the Washington Post, and I had exhibitions of that in Afghanistan and also in other countries as well.
Is this child sexual abuse, is this subject only to Hazaran children, or does this extend to other ethnic groups such as the Pashtuns?
Surprisingly, like I don't know, like so that practice or that tradition does not exist in Hazaristan or central Afghanistan, and it is more like a very common practice and tradition in the east of Afghanistan, and also like in towards Kandahar, and also in the north of Afghanistan. So like it is very widespread there, and the story I documented that in Kabul, in the capital, which is also widespread there, but it is mostly within like other ethnic groups. Hazaras are not very much involved into this practice. I did a lot of research but couldn't find any, and did not get like, so yeah, I didn't witness any Hazara in that practice being involved, either as a warlord or as a like boy.
How does your work help the Hazarans in Afghanistan and also around the world?
I guess my work, like as a photojournalist, I was not working only for the Hazaras. Like as a like I felt this was a responsibility to document anything which was unfolding in front of me and which was related to me, or like which I wanted or I thought is not correct. So I was very much careful, or I mean very much concerned about those issues that I thought should not exist in Afghanistan for anyone, such as, like, for instance, I did stories about the victims of landmines. Like it happened to anyone, like it was not exclusively for the Hazaras. Or I did stories about the dancing boys, which was not something related to the Hazaras, and other, like there were stories that I did work on, and especially the street kids in Kabul. Like most of them, like there were non-Hazara kids there. So I was more passionate about like the rights of the children and the human rights abuses, like to highlight those issues in my work. But for the Hazaras, like which as a Hazara I could understand the pain and the history and the issues going on in my community more deeply, and also I was able to document those issues, such as like the discrimination and oppression. Like when I had to leave Afghanistan, I went back to Pakistan. I documented the targeted killings of the Hazaras in Pakistan and their genocide, the genocide happening to them, which I documented. And also when I had to leave Afghanistan and Pakistan because of the situations, and I traveled with the smugglers to go to Australia, and I decided to document that story. So I unfolded these stories to highlight what was happening with this very vulnerable ethnic group in Afghanistan, who are subject to persecution, who are subject to genocide, and who are subject to discrimination to this day in the presence of the international powers in the country. So I think my role as a photographer is to raise awareness and to tell what is going wrong in that country and with the people. So I think raising awareness by itself is helpful, I guess, to let people know about the situations. And I think that is my role, and that is how I can help raise awareness about different situations.
Batoor, are you working on any projects right now? Well, what is your next assignment, if you have?
At the moment, I am working with an organization as an organizer for to support refugees and people seeking asylum in Australia. And recently my film, which like I started from Afghanistan in 2012, and I documented all the way through Australia. So that has been selected at the Melbourne Documentary Film Festival, which is going to be screened in a couple of weeks on 22nd of July at the Melbourne Documentary Film Festival. So that is one of the projects. And also, like, I'm working like there is a I had been working on a project to make my work, to get my work published as books. So I had been working, kind of trying to get a deal for that. So there are kind of more works that I'm involved with.
And where can people view your film that's going to be screened at the film festival?
So the screening will be at the cinema. So the screening will be at the Cinema Nova in Melbourne, Australia, on 26th of July. So more information can be found on the Melbourne Documentary Film Festival's website, and also if people are following me on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram, so also I share quite often the information about my work and film and all those stuff.
Batoor, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us today.
This is really a pleasure. Thank you very much for having me. And
thanks a lot, Batoor.
Really
thanks
nice
for your work. We really appreciate that. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Angelo and John.